words matter greatly, and AI, artificial intelligence, will not uh, compose ideas for you if you don't have any. It can put ideas in form, it can improve things, but if you have nothing to say about something, no big picture idea, and you don't prompt it to say, hey, write a paragraph of 300 words about this, if you don't have a this, then it can't be done. And the only way that you have a this is if you have words of your own and if you have ideas.
Is reading wholly necessary? It sounds a little bit weird to even question that, but there's a lot of technologies right now that make reading feel obsolete. However, in our conversation today, Dr. Kathy helps point out that reading puts things in context and helps us build an understanding of an unfolding story. That can be really important for especially kids today because we can get caught up in the cultural moment and forget the larger story. Reading helps us see the larger story. But what do we do when the culture doesn't really encourage us to do that? It can put some of us in a dark place. How do we train this in our kids? Today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, Dr. Kathy has some important insights. So we're going to turn to her now.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, whether we like it or not, artificial intelligence is really poised to make it less urgent for kids to learn how to compose sentences and paragraphs. School kids from here on out will be able to, with a push of a button, summon some fluent prose that they'll be able to use to wow and woo people. And I think it's interesting when we spend time in academia, we see that those who are in charge of schools and education inevitably make decisions for our kids on what they're going to need to be prepared for. It's natural now for us to really focus on different things like science and math and have little time for language or language arts because technology has made composition incredibly accessible. What do you have to say about the value of language arts? Should we care about this with our kids as they're in school, or should we be okay with schools just kind of, equipping them for the modern 21st century? What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Kathy?
You know my thoughts, my friend. We have to care deeply. Words matter. Words matter greatly. And AI, artificial intelligence, will not compose ideas for you if you don't have any. It can put ideas in form, it can improve things, but if you have nothing to say about something, no big picture idea, and you don't prompt it to say, hey, write a paragraph of 300 words about this, if you don't have a this, then it can't be done. And the only way that you have a this is if you have words of your own and if you have ideas. And ideas are formed through words. Words give life to ideas. Children need to learn how to write with pen and paper. Children need to be able to compose thoughts when they don't have tech available to them. We're recording this as we're watching recovery from the horrible destruction of the hurricane from Florida up to North Carolina, and no technology, no electricity, right? So what if there's a day when we don't have the devices? Will anybody be able to compose anything? It's fascinating to think about.
Dr. Kathy, I think that's interesting. It reminds me a little bit of some different things that I would say kind of exist inside of the smarts, right? Those that are word or logic smart, they probably really enjoy using words and being a part of the language arts classes. They can see themselves writing and expressing themselves in that way. But there's other kids that might not naturally hold those smarts that appreciate it in the same way. And I think sometimes when we look at this, we can kind of say to our kids, well, you're just not, wired for math, or you're just not wired for language arts. But I think that there's something that we've started to do here at the ministry. And maybe I say started to because it's more me that started to do it, not necessarily you. You've been doing it for a while. But that's this idea of really talking about the smarts as if they're things to be awakened, not necessarily like personality characteristics or traits that we hold for in perpetuity and the rest of time, that I'm going to always struggle with being logic smart or I'm always going to struggle with being self smart. But you talk a lot about this idea of awakening or developing other smarts in our kids when they might not naturally hold that smart. Why should we lean into this idea of the smarts and help our kids develop these traits, maybe even sometimes word or logic traits that they might not naturally have, but we should awaken them? Why should we do that with our kids?
We believe that God created every person with the capacity to develop all eight. If we did MRIs of children's brains, there would be evidence that all eight are there. And the earlier they're awakened through play and experiences, the greater the likelihood their strength for a lifetime. And ideally, we develop all eight for what I would call having an abundant life. It is true that different smarts come in handy in different intellectual pursuits. Logic smart is super important for science and math. And if you have a child who's pursuing, an agricultural profession, they want to be nature smart. They're also going to have to be logic smart. If you have kids who want to be an architect, they've got to be math and logic and picture in order to do that well. My nephew Andy, who's a very gifted engineer, is logic smart and people smart. And it's his interactions with people that have elevated his position at his company. All eight matter academically because the smarts always work together. Logic and music is a sound engineer. Music and body is a drummer. And so if you limit your kids and they only have 3 or 4 out of the 8 that they choose to develop, there will be so much they're going to be lacking in that will be eventually frustrating. Right now, they might go, I'm good, mom, I'm good. But what if they date a girl later on that has a real gift in music and now they can't really relate to her because they have no music spark? What if they end up, entering a career and right now the career depends upon word and logic, but then technology changes and it really becomes very much a self-smart thing where you work from home and you're in front of a device and you have to be able to trust your own thoughts because you don't have access to community. What are you going to be able to do now? So I think all eight matter for an abundant life, not just in career, but in life and in joy. An example, very music smart as a kid, you know that. Went to the university, I went to march in the band. I used to play a lot of instruments. It was a really important part of my life. I don't play a single instrument anymore, but what do I like to do in spare time? Go to concerts. What's my connection with my brother and his wife? Music. Absolutely. If you were to ask, it'd be Green Bay Packers. And the second thing would be music and the concerts we go to together and the music that we share with each other through, devices. And so I think it's connection. I think it's belonging. I think it's academic wellness, college and below. And then I think it's career success. There's just so much. It just causes us to become who God created us to be. And in that, there's great joy.
I love that, Dr. Kathy. I do think that there's great joy in it. And it's maybe a challenge for me to wrestle through some of this because it's my desire that I have a school or a church that partners with me in this. And in many times, some of these different places, institutions kind of view the things that are happening in culture and want to prepare kids for the challenge of what's happening in culture, right? So I get kind of bristled by this. It's such a small little thing maybe inside of culture, but for me it's a little bit of a big thing that when our pastor says, now let's look at this part of the scripture, he says, and now you can turn on your Bibles or turn the pages. And I get annoyed by that. I'm thinking, no, we shouldn't turn on our Bible. We should turn the page or recall from memory. Like even that would be better for me. But this idea of always looking to devices and expecting it to be in our hands, it drives me nuts. But I do think that there's a place for us to kind of establish this, maybe even inside of our own home, knowing that schools or churches may have a different approach or focus. How should we as parents maybe elevate some of these different things like language arts and especially some of these contemplative practices that we would anticipate being something trained or taught in schools or churches, but might be, I would say, maybe neglected or pushed a little bit to the side because of the current cultural mood. What should we do as parents, and how can we step wisely into this because we are in charge of parenting the kids that we have?
Totally. They watch us carefully. They listen to us carefully. I pray if they respect you, they do. And they will very much become who we call them out to be. And we will see our own behaviors, showing up in them. So do we read regularly? I think they need to see us read for information. I hope they see us read magazines, newspapers, websites. I hope they see us pay attention to, the church newsletter. I hope they see us read for recreational fun. I hope they see that we're still learning maybe to read even better, certain vocabulary words as an example. I think they need to see us read a paper Bible. I am in total agreement about that. We are going to raise generations who don't have a clue the order of the Bible books. They won't know which books are in the Old and the New Testament. And they're going to be able to search, but they don't see the bigger context. It drives me nuts as well. I understand it from a convenience standpoint, but a paper Bible is just different. Here's what kids and I have talked about. Young people tell me, yeah, Dr. Kathy, my device is a toy. It's where I get my entertainment. It's not where I want my Bible. Because I don't want to get sucked into the lie that my Bible is entertaining or my Bible is the fluff of what most of the stuff on my devices are. And so I think out of the mouth of a young adult, I think that's something to be taken seriously. I want us to read and write in our homes. I want them to see us do that. I want us to challenge them to do it because I think it adds a richness to our lives.
I really like what Dr. Kathy had to say here as we closed out. It reminded me of a passage actually out of Philippians chapter 4, and I'll begin reading at verse 8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true and whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Paul wrote this in context of a church that was in the middle of Philippi. He wrote it to really encourage this church that was working through their faith to build an understanding of unity and joy, really to grow into spiritual maturity. And these verses specifically focus on the importance of maintaining a positive, godly mindset, putting our minds in framework of what's to come, being able to read especially and see the horizon and the unfolding story even of what's happening now can be really helpful. It helps us focus on things that are true and noble and praiseworthy. We can pull them out of stories and then we can pull them out of even our lives. Christians are called to elevate their thoughts and not really be swayed by the different ideas of the world, especially when things of negativity and false teaching and harmful influences are presented. We need to have a longer range view of what's happening. Reading helps us build a creative imagination of what could happen and what might happen as a story is unfolding. I think teaching our kids that as we read to them can be a bright light that shines and cuts through some dark times they're going to face. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, this daily segment, Facing the Dark. We're so glad that you joined us this week. And on behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. It's been a great week with you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you here again on Monday.